where we left off from the last video is that we created a basic communication framework between the client and server. The server right now is written in Java, and the client, we're using Telnet to replicate the client. Right, so let me show you what we've done since the last video. Right, so in here we have this while loop that's reading commands from the client, and if the client sends a quit command, then it actually closes the socket, and that's the end of the communication. Otherwise, we basically send back whatever the client sends to the server. So basically it's echoing the message back to the client. Right, so let me show you that. Right, so here I'm using this telnet command, right, localhost, and then the port 8818, and that's what we define as the server port for this chat server. Right, so now if I type in a line, right, I send that to the server, and the server is going to return back with the utype, and then whatever line that we send it, right? So this basically is echoing back whatever we are sending to the server. So, right, and then finally, if I type in quit, it will then terminate the connection. All right, so in this video, we want to deal with the user presence. Right, presence is basically knowing when the user is online and offline. Obviously, in a multi-user chat, that's a very important feature, right? Because you want to send messages to people that are online, and when they're offline, they won't be able to receive messages. Right, so let's go ahead and build out that in this video. Right, so let's talk about communication protocol for a bit. Okay, so there's going to be messages to exchange between different parties, right? So, well, you're going to have two parties, right? You're going to have the user, and then you're also going to have the server, right? So one form of communication is going to be from the user to the server. Another one is going to be from the server to the user, right? And then finally, you're going to have users to user. Right, so let's take a look at the first form. Right, so communication between the user and server could be things such as login and logoff commands. Right, you can also issue like status commands. Right, you can also, so the second form of communication is from the server to the user. So the server could send online and offline messages to the user in case other users come online and offline. And this is a way that we can manage the presence of different users. So for example, if another client connects to the server and then it logs in as a user, then the other users that are already online will be notified that new user is now available for accepting messages. Right, and then finally, the third type of communication is from user to user. So this is basically you're sending direct messages, right? Or you can broadcast messages to all users. Right? So those types of communication styles, right, we will eventually support. But in this video, right, let's look at just doing this login, logoff commands. Okay, so to do that, right, we will need to enhance this piece, right, to recognize more commands. Okay, when we want to do login, logoff, right? So for example, let's do commands. Right, so when we want to log in, right, we should really have a login and a user and a password. Right, and then when we do log off, it's just log off, right, without any username or password. Okay, so now we're gonna enlist the help of this commands lang from Apache to help do the token splitting. Okay, so here I'm going to split my line into individual tokens using the string utilities and then split. Right, this string utilities actually have have many different split functions, right? But the one that we're going to use is going to be the very basic one, which is the first one, right? And this one will split the line into different string tokens based on the white space characters. And then from the tokens, the first token is always going to be our command. Okay, but we want to make sure that those tokens doesn't cause us any null pointer exceptions. Okay, so now we can actually replace this line with the command, and then finally, if we don't recognize that command, we should send an error back to the client, and then we can use this unknown as a way of just indicating that we don't support this command. Okay, so now we don't need that anymore. And then let's see how that works. Right, so we just restarted the server, and I'm gonna have this telnet to the server. Okay, and then if I say hello, it should return me back an unknown, right, which is true, right? And then now even if I say world, it also unknown. And then finally, if I say quit, it should terminate that connection. So everything works as expected. So then now let's enhance our program to recognize more commands. All right, so again, from this protocol, where we want to say login and recognize the user and then the password. All right, so if this is our command, what we want to do is we want to create another function to keep this loop simple, right? So we're going to have different functions to handle different cases. All right, so pass in the token, and then we can also pass in the output stream just in case we need to write something back to the client. So I'm going to create this method, right? And we do want to check to see if the number of tokens is greater than 2, right? Because we're actually expecting 3, so we should just test for 3, right? And if that's the case, that means the login is going to be the first or the second token, right? The password is going to be the third token, right? And then we can, for now, we're not going to deal with storing usernames and passwords. So in this case, we're just going to hard code some of the users in the code right now, right? So if we okay, so here, if we say guess, and then the password is also guess, right, we will allow that to happen, and we will allow that user to log in. So guess is basically a valid user, right? So in this case, I can return some status to okay, so what I've done is basically to take the login and password from what the user has entered, and then check to see if the login is guess and the password is guess. If that's the case, then I return OK login, right? Otherwise, right, I'm going to say error login. Okay, so now let's restart the server and see how that works. Okay, so I say login, and then guess, and it should say OK login. right, and quit. Okay, so now we need to have some state, right? Because once they log in as a user, we also want to tag this connection as that user. All right, so here in this class, I'm going to have another variable called this login. Right now, set it to null if it's not logged in. So here, back in this handle login, then I can just set the current login of this server worker to be the login. Okay, so now I'm just going to print out a message saying that this user has logged in. Okay, so let's see how that works. Okay, so here you can see from the output that this user is now assigned to this variable for this user. So now let's create more users. Right, so here if we say this is guess, we may also want to have another one just so that we can test with other users. Say Jim, and then the password, and then say Jim. Right, so this is or. Okay, so now we just permission 2 users, Jim, and then guess as the login and password. All right, so let's see how that works. Okay, so login, Jim, and that should work. But then now if we want to create another one, another connection, right, we should be able to do that. Now that we have 2 different connections, right, one login as Jim and then one login as guest. In a multi-user system, obviously you want to know when the other person logs in. So it would be nice that when, say, the login as guest happens, that this connection also receive a notification that guest is now online. Right, so that's what we're going to do next. Now, in order for us to do that, we have to now have access to every connection that is available to the server. Right, so and then that's basically going to be the responsibility of this server main. Right, so now we're going to refactor this server main to have a server object that is a collection of this server workers. Okay, so now we're going to create a new class called server, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a instance of the server. Okay, and I'm going to pass in this port. Okay, and then we have to create a constructor with this port. Call this the server port, and then from there we basically put in, we want to make this server also a thread, right? And every thread you need to override the run method, and then this run method is the one that's gonna accept the connections. Okay, so simply we just call start, and that will kick off the thread. Okay, so the reason why we want to do this is because we want to have a collection of these workers, so then we can actually have other workers iterate through the collection of workers, and that's how we're going to send messages to other connections, from one connection to another connection. Okay, so now in this server, I'm going to have a list of server workers. Okay, and then I will then add that worker to the list. And then at the same time, I'm also going to now have a way for the server workers to access all other server workers. Okay, and in order for those server workers to access the server instance, I'm going to have to also pass the server as part of the parameter. Okay, so what we've done is we basically now able to pass this server instance to each server worker. So then now you can actually just from the server worker get all the other instances of server workers, so then we can send messages to each one of those, right? And we can expose the login, so then other server workers know that that's what the login is. Okay, so now when the user logs in, right, we want to send every other server worker instance that is currently connected to the server a message that the current user has logged in. So let's do that. So now what I do is in here I'm going to get a list of all the workers, right? And what we want to do is we want to iterate through that list. And then we want to send something to each worker, right? So in this case, the message that I want to send is going to be an online message. So I would say online, and then followed by the login. Okay, so let's create this send method, right? So the send method is going to just access the output stream of the current client socket and then send a message to the user. So in this case, now I have to make this shared, right? So I'm going to make this a instance field and class field, and then from there I should be able to now okay, so I want to just rename this to be message to be more generic, because this can be more than any message. Okay, so what I've done so far is I'm going to send this online message to every worker that's currently connected to this server. Okay, so let's see how that works. Okay, so here I'm going to log in as guest, and then basically it sends a message to itself, right? So and when I log in as Jim. Okay, so you can now see that for the connection is already existing, it basically now has a new message called online gym, right? So basically this will tell the guest connection that a new user called Jim is now online. Okay, and then the other thing that we need to do is to broadcast to this connection that is associated with Jim that the guest is already online, right? And the way that we do that is by going through all the existing workers and then sending the current and then basically we're going to send the current connection okay, so we're going to send the current connection all these online messages. Okay, so here. Okay, so up to this point, we have two blocks, right? First block of code is going to send the current user, right? All other online logins. And this second block is going to send other online users current users status, right? Okay, so let's see that in action. Right, so let's restart the server and see how that works. Okay, so now if I log in as guest in the top one. So when we log in as guest in the top one, right, we have all these online messages. So some of them are not necessary, especially this one, the null, right? And then null is because of this connection. This connection currently is not logged in, so it doesn't have a login, and that's why it's null. Also, since you already logged in as guest, you may not need to know that yourself is online because assume you're already online, right? So in this case, we can filter out the null and also the current login that is associated with this connection, right? And now if I log in as Jim, right, you can see that this connection also receives all the existing current users, right? This online guest is basically this connection on top, and then the other user is Jim, which you don't really need. Also, here, this connection actually gets notified that the new user Jim is online. Okay, so let's do some cleanup. Okay, so first, if the login is null, we don't want to send messages. Okay, so that basically take care of this case. And secondly, we want to avoid sending online statuses to yourself. Okay, so if your current login is not yourself, then you can send that. So this case will take care of not sending your own presence. Okay, so let's see how that works. Okay, so we can still see that there is a null here, right? And that is because of this connection currently not logged in yet. Okay, so here we have to protect that it's not null before we send it to other users. Okay, so up to this point, we still have this online guess, which we need to take care of. Okay, so actually this one should be over here, right? You also, okay, so here you also need to guard against yourself. Okay, that's good. So then now if I log in as Jim, okay, so here what we have is when we log in as guest on the top and then Jim on the bottom, right, that each one of these connections only receive the other connection's login status. So in this case, the guest on top will only receive online Jim, and then the Jim login on the bottom will only receive online guest. So that's how we can create the presence. And then to finish up, right, what we can do is when we do the quit, right, we can also handle the logoff. Right, since we don't need any tokens. So here what we're going to do is we're going to say it's either quit or logoff, right, to mean the same thing. Okay, so when we do the logoff, all we're doing is going to close the current socket, but at the same time we want to send every other users the status that this current user has logged off. Okay, so we're going to use the same block as that, and then instead of doing that, we're going to say it's offline. And we're going to access the list of workers. And then let's see how that works out. Okay, so now I'm logged in as guest. And then I have to log in as somebody first. Okay, and then now if I quit, or the same as log off, right? On the top, I should see offline Jim, which is true. Right? Okay, so that's how we have it. We just created the commands to handle the presence of the users. So then when the user comes online or goes offline, we notify other users that the current status of every other user in the system, right? So that's basically the foundation for building the presence of users in a multi-user chat system, right? So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.